the Germans and the British, I think it was, or the Americans, but they called for a truce, and it was Christmas. So all of a sudden, they are both sort of got out of their ditches, walked across the battlefield, the battle zone, a battle area, and embraced each other and played soccer all day long. Shared the food that they had and everything with each other, had a meal, a Christmas meal, sang Christmas songs. When it came nighttime, they went back to their bunkers and the war started all over again. I know it's kind of a funky story, but in the end, basically, that's an extreme expression of, my enemy and doing something for my enemy. And I'm sure that the men at that point in time must have said, how can I go back and shoot the guy who just gave me his salami, whatever. But either way, but go ahead.
Okay, I don't know a lot about the interpretation of this thing, and St. Augustine made the early interpretation of it. He said that the Samaritan was Jesus.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to all of that, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, and that's, the guy that was hurt was a sinner, because they were against Jesus. So when Jesus was the Samaritan, they were against the Samaritans, the Jews against the Samaritans.
Yeah.
He came back and he showed compassion for the Jewish people, and that's to save their life. But that's what Saint Augustine said.
Yeah, the idea here is that Jesus came to humanity to pull the human being out of his misery and out of his sins. The man laying in a ditch, that kind of represents that. And he is the Good Samaritan. Like I said, based at least in some experience on something that actually happened, but is a complete opposite. The Jews hated the Samaritans. Samaritans hated the Jews. You're talking about two people that are completely opposite, and here you have God, who is, because he loves him. And that's what St. Augustine is talking about. He reaches on into the life of the human being to draw him out of his misery and out of his sin. So
act reiterates that your life is valuable. So it's not so much about the one giving the mercy as it is the one that receives the mercy to realize their life is valuable. And so many cultures don't see life, even, if they think reincarnation, no big deal if you're in pain because you'll have another life or another, but to recognize this is our life on earth.
Yeah.
It reemphasized that for me, the word mercy.
But that ties right back into the abortion issue as well, that the value of life. Where is the value of life when you can kill a child 2 days after it's come out of the womb? If you don't want it, what are you trading in cars? Is that it? I mean, but people have lost the ability of being compassionate. And I was in a parable as well. Don't live your life just for yourself. Live your life for others. One day when we come before the judgment seat of Christ, and we will take just one moment, and you wonder who they are, and Christ says to you, these are all the people whose lives you affected and touched by your life. So your whole life was worth living because of these souls as well. It wasn't just about you. But how shameful would it be if Christ had turned around and there was nobody there? Because you lived your life for yourself. You never picked up anybody out of the ditch. And it doesn't mean I got to go down to the local alcoholic neighborhood and pick up people out of the ditch or sidewalks or things like that. And I know the saints have said to us that one prayer said for a particular individual on a particular day and a particular time and so on can save their souls. That's why I said, when you look back and you see all these hundreds of souls, you say, who is that, Lord? Your life was lived for others. Isn't that what Christ lived his life for? For everybody. And that's what we're supposed to do as well. To give ourselves for the good of others. So.
One of the things I treasure about our marriage is
God has given Dave and I the grace to be in so many places throughout our lives where people have needed help. And it's just amazing how we were this all of a sudden there. I mean, even one time in Ryan's, when we first moved here, I had noticed that a lady was having a difficult time swallowing. That was in the table close to us. Somebody help her. Everybody just kept eating. I thought,
Yes.
this is bizarre. So I called.
A lot of man doesn't want to be involved. That's the problem. That's why as Christian, we must get involved.
Well, we did. So it was right there on the floor in front of the restroom. And I did keep looking around because, I mean, when I was giving her the breast, she just dumped all over me and everything, which is normal. All this was going on, and people were just acting like they didn't see it. I couldn't understand how they could not see what's going on.
Well, it's like, isn't it like the ostrich who sticks his head in the sand? He figures if he can't see it, they can't see him.
And I'm not complaining because I really felt like, again, the grace was there from the beginning. God focused me on that woman to know that, for me to understand there was probably chicken caught in her throat. She needed someplace to live, to eat, help get back home. So it was like a 2-month process that we brought her into our house and everything. But boy, the blessings that we got from that. She ended up being such a wonderful person. I loved sitting down talking to her on my front porch. She was a helicopter pilot.
Wow.
Wow. But she was very injured from her dad's death. And her mother, they weren't lives. You don't just put them up somewhere and just leave them. I mean, I like the way he left money to take care of her. But I really do believe it's the grace that God gives you. Wants me was recently when we were going back home on Wares Valley Road, just right outside of Pigeon Forge. There was, I don't know, there's a man or a woman, but this person was sitting on the curb, and it almost looked like a St. Padre Pio kind of look, dressed like that, and it was like a big heavy coat and gray hair coming down, and that person was sitting there like this, and that person looked straight at me as we passed in the truck. And I told him, I said, David, did you see that person? And we didn't turn around and go back. And that, I love the fact that I got
With that, I was in Nashville, and I think it just scared me more than anything. I was at a light, and it was nighttime, and this lady just came up to my car at the driver's side. She had desperation. What?
what happened to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, be my fault.
Yeah.
You might going to see that later on that I didn't help that person.
Yeah.
But remember, while I'm thinking about it, true charity also knows boundaries, which means in a sense of being in a modern world today, being a female, trying to help a male if you're by yourself can be a risky maneuver.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a man with you, if you're married or whatever, it's different because you have some security there. But I would caution, of course, the females, you want to help somebody. To stop and give somebody a couple of dollars usually isn't a big deal, but be careful of putting somebody in your car or bring mail around. We're living in that kind of time period. It's limits, so. But the thing of it being at the same time, remember that very famous story in New York where a young woman was being raped in the alley? And there's a very, very famous story talked about for years. Large buildings, they were all apartment units. And this man was raping her and she was screaming at the top of her lungs. Not a single person cared enough to come down out of their high horse, their apartment, to see what was going on. Not one person. And of course, it hit the newspaper. It was a very, very famous story, which is still oftentimes repeated today. But has a human being really come that far that he can't hear the cry and the needs of another human being? It's terrible. Had I been in a situation like that and I'd have heard it, the least thing I would have done is checked it out. What's going on here? I would have went down and I would have checked it out. If I saw some man that he was trying to rape some girl, I certainly would have reacted to it. So I don't see how you couldn't have, even if it cost you your own life. but nobody reacted. True story. She lived, yeah, that's how the story got out. So
Have y'all been on the receiving end of mercy?
all of us probably have, yeah.
It's a way to know God.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's an experience of the person that's merciful. It's a beautiful thing.
All the time. Yes.
I always find that
Sometimes.
I always find that God gives and puts the right people in your life at a moment when you're in need. You may not even, and you say, "Thank you, Lord, for doing that." You didn't ask; it just came. So
We were put out of our place. I was living real close to the church, and the guy decided to sell the place for somebody. And this lady, they mentioned my name, said, "Oh, I know her from church," and she was a landlady of the place. And so that's where I'm staying now. I mean, it's not a glamorous place, but I'm not in the street. You know what I mean? So yes, I know mercy.
Do you think that sometimes Jesus actually puts himself in your path?
Absolutely.
Because,
Big time.
Through other people.
I mean, there was a time we pulled up at a restaurant, his bosses was living in the van with us, and we pulled up to the restaurant, and I noticed a guy sitting on the curb right there close to the restaurant. And boy, was he homeless looking.
Mhm.
And when we came back out of the restaurant, he was still there. And I started to get in the van, and I saw a $10 bill laying on the bank down close to the busy highway. So I went down and picked it up, and it's just like I had somebody just taking me by the hand over to that guy, and I gave it to that guy. I said, "Would you like this?" And he said, "Huh? Oh yeah." But the whole thing was just so spiritual feeling to me. And when we were driving away, I said, "I think that was Jesus."
Mhm.
Well, you never-
Like he could have been.
you never know when you're
It was a
entertaining
test.
angels, right?
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Never know when you're entertaining angels. There's a very famous story in the diary of Sister Faustina. Um, it's just before the Second World War comes. There's a lot of food shortages. There's a lot of problems. Sisters are very limited to the meals that they have in a community. They have one meal a day. And Sister Faustina happens to be the one in charge of the kitchen. So she's cooking basically borscht soup every day for the sisters. And they had this one meal. And Sister Faustina also had come and ask for food, and she would give it to them. Mother Superior finally said to her, "Stop doing that. We don't have enough. We don't have enough to feed ourselves and to feed others." Was in the kitchen when the gate bell rang, and she opened the gate. And there was this man. He was just as haggard as he had leaves in it, like he'd been outside. He smelled like smoke, like he'd been hanging around the fireplace. And he says, "Do you have anything to eat?" And Sister Faustina remembered exactly what Mother Superior said, that she should not be giving the food away of the sisters because we will not have enough. And in that, she found something Sister didn't say. Mother Superior didn't say she couldn't give her bowl away. So she invited the man in. He sat at the kitchen table. She walked over to the pot. She took her bowl and ladled out. Looked. So you never know. You never know when you're entertaining angels or entertaining God. Don't look at the externals. Don't look at the externals because you might miss the point. Now we have, sometimes when I'm with people and I travel with people and I share it with them. I'm not going to starve to death. Um, but a lot of people will roll the windows up. If I'm riding with somebody, they got to live in a big house. To knew nothing of that poor beggar or that poor person laying in the ditch. But yet you want to make a judgment on that person and say, well, they have enough, or they live, on plenty of money. They have plenty of money in the bank. How do you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Focus on them.
And it's happened in the life of many saints. I've seen it many times throughout the ages. But her story is the one I remember because I read it. And I've been to the convent there where Sister Faustina lived. And it's just a very touching story. And you just never know. You just never know when right there is God and you don't even realize it. And realize it was him. You have to wonder,
A few people.
you know?
You learn a lot of things riding on the MARTA. Has anybody ridden on MARTA in Atlanta?
Not a long time.
I did it just because I was by myself and I just wanted to ride. I've never ridden on it. All kinds of things happen on there. And there was this poor little woman. They don't give blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to say what they said. Nothing. Because she did that, and I heard that. And still, my heart was moved. I didn't have much. I gave her $5, But still, my heart was moved to do that. Instead of sitting back there like this, whoever it was, this jackbutt that was saying profanities about this poor woman, sitting there. You just never know.
Have you ever written the Moscow Underground? I mean, you talk about weird. Talk about that being weird. The Moscow Underground is probably 100 times worse. Everybody's drunk. People throwing up, cursing, yelling, looking at you. They look like any moment you're gonna get stabbed. It was a weird experience. But one of the things I've always tried to do when I travel is I try to take several $100 in Israel. A dollar goes a long way. I went out, or some of the other people went out to walk around and see things, or go get out and go get in the bus. There was always 50 to 100 kids there. And it's cost 800 rubles a month for your rent, which is about 60 cents. So I carried all these dollars in my pocket and I just gave it to the kids. And people started yelling at me. And when I was there, the same thing. We were going inside churches, and I stood outside while everybody was on the bus and I was handing these kids dollar bills. I brought it for them because I knew that was going to be there. I knew that opportunity would come. So I gave it to Dad. I didn't get angry. I just gave what I had and got back on the bus. But I remember there was a man standing there by the Church of St. Anne. And he looked like something gangrene or something had eaten most of his leg away. I was on the second bus. The first people, the people, and I noticed that, St. Anne, and I noticed that nobody gave him anything. He was standing there with his hand out, asking, please, And I figured he probably didn't have a job he was holding down. So I reached in my pocket and, gave him what I had. And he was so smile on his face. And I walked and I started giving to the man as well. And I realized all of a sudden charity is contagious. If you're willing to give charity heroically, others will follow. But people have done it had I not begun it. So I've seen it happen many, many times before. Nobody's given anything. I drive by, I give them a couple of bucks, and all of a sudden everybody's reaching out their window giving them money. It only takes a moment of courageous charity to help another human being, and others will, reach out also, but they have to see the example sometimes. So.
Yeah, I was surprised when I was in Russia because, they got that one little bill that's the rabbit that's worth like 1.5 cents.
Yeah.
It's a little tiny bill.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something else that gives you joy. Girlfriend, Compassion wanted me to grab this little girl and just hold her and tell her, honey, I don't know what's wrong, but it's going to be okay. That kind of thing. You just don't know what people are looking for. You don't know where their hearts are. And everybody needs a hug. I'm a hugger. So.
The words stand out to me, Father, if you could explain this. It mentions twice when the priest passed by him, when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. To me, that sounds like it's almost like they walked away from God and went to the other side or something. I guess it's not that direct, but is there something to that too, that was put in there?
The whole idea of walking on the other side is, I don't want to get involved. I don't see that person. I don't want to look at that person. I don't want to know. So, yeah.
I thought there was something to that.
And there's a tendency sometimes, of course, in our own human nature to do that as well. especially when we have to deal with difficult people sometimes, under the mask. And I say, oh my gosh, I'd go the other way. So, well, as ladies, like I said, if you're single, you're by yourself, whatever, you don't have a male company along the way, be careful, talking to a man or, letting a man come into you has a lot of difficulties. And men will pick on, vulnerable. So, anyways, for you, anything for you?
Yeah, I was thinking, Father, that Samaritans had a very bad reputation.
Right.
Okay? What was that because they weren't Jewish, or were they just really bad people?
No, no, they weren't bad people. The Samaritans only accepted the 5 books of the Pentateuch.
Okay.
They didn't accept the prophets. They didn't accept the Psalms. None of the other things that the Israelites accepted as part of their writings, a part of their devotion. Because the Jews pray the Psalms every day. But the Samaritans only had the 5 books, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, beginning with the book of Genesis.
So it would be significant if Jesus appeared as a Samaritan to help this man,
Yeah,
since the Jews looked down upon this
right.
man.
Yeah, actually, today you can still go to Samaria. You can still go to Jacob's well, and off in the distance you can see their huge structure there, their building, their temple, or whatever you call it, where they still today, the Samaritans and Jews still today don't have any dialogue and don't get along.
Really?
Yeah. So it's an ancient feud. A Jew would never, step into territory where the Samaritans lived, or Samaritan territory or property, or so on and so on. In fact, for Jesus to do it in one of his trips, catching the woman at the well, she was a Samaritan woman, was very unusual. But he knew there was a soul there that had to be brought to Christ, so he was willing to take the risk. Not that he was afraid. I mean, for him it wasn't an issue, but he sent his apostles away because they would only ruin it. They didn't understand it. They would only ruin the whole experience. Christ needed a time with that woman to bring her slowly into the mystery.
And she brought other people in.
And then she went and got others, yeah. And they invited them into the village and so on and so on, yeah.
And it has to be a gift of mercy, not pity, not responsibility, true mercy. When you're
Well,
sharing
true love,
this.
true charity, love for another human being. It's like you should be able to, the natural way of looking at the human being today is no longer this way, but it's this way. I'm better than you are. How dare you tell me what to do, or so on and so on. I'm better than you. You stay in your own place and leave me alone. But as a Christian, we should be able to look everybody in the eye. And if you're going to be a saint, you need to be able to look up to people. It's the only way it works. Can't ever look down on anybody.
I read a story, Father, about this. All of these people were going to this mom's church on Sunday. And there was a really horrible, he looked disheveled and dirty and destitute. He was just leaning against the pillar of the church outside. When people walked by him, as if he was invisible. And so it was time for the mass. And this guy was sitting in the back it was a Protestant church. He was sitting in the back of the church. And the minister was talking, and people, they didn't want to sit with him, he was like. So the president minister said, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the new minister. And he walked up the aisle, got behind on the podium, and he said, I'm ashamed of every single one. And they all put their heads up because they were embarrassed about what they did. And he said, next Sunday, I expect to see people of God in here. So you just can't judge everybody, That must have been a shock.
I read that story.
Did you read that?
Yeah.
It was really interesting.
It's a true story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's.
Yes, it is a true story. He looked terrible. I actually saw a picture of it.
Yeah, it looked, nobody wanted to sit there.
Nobody wanted to sit there.
And then he walks up the aisle. What?
If we're gonna truly know, love, and serve God, we have to do it. We come to know God through everyone.
You can't judge people. That's for the Lord to do.
Look at the saints who threw their lives into the middle of especially the great plagues in the Middle Ages, who stepped right in the middle of the disease to care for the sick.
Right.
St. Bridget of Sweden, St. Francis of Rome, many of them. And Bridget of Sweden would actually hire priests because the priests all ran away. She would actually hire priests and pay them to take care of the dying so they could have the last rites. And she would actually, take care of them, wash their clothes, wash them, and she would even suck the pus out of their wounds. Now that's a saint. She deserves to be canonized.
Absolutely.
So,
I don't think I'll ever reach that point, Bob.
well, hopefully you'll never have to do that, but
God.
I'm sure, if you ever had the experience, you were in a desert and somebody got bit by a snake, and the only way you're going to get that poison out is cut them and suck that blood.
Yeah, they'd be dead.
Think of things you did for each other.
No, you would probably do it, I'm sure. Sucking blood ain't that bad.
No.
No.
IRS does it all the time.
Huh?
The IRS. I said the IRS sucks blood all the time.
No, I know. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Sherry? Okay. Rosa?
Yes, I have two, from the parable of the Good Samaritan, I have two observations that I'd like to share. The first one that is very obvious is that the need for compassion. That we're called to be compassionate like Jesus. And when we see someone in need, whether it's in an accident or just financial need or whatever, that we need to have that compassion in our heart. And I think that's what this Good Samaritan had, was he had, whatever he was, whatever his reputation was or whatever, he still had compassion in his heart. And that's one point that I see. The other point that I see is judging. The word prejudice comes from the word prejudge, okay? And I grew up in Southwest Texas in a Mexican-American community with Mexican-American living on one side of the city or the town, across from the railroad track, and the white community living on the other side of the railroad track. And back in before my days, the whites had their own school and the Mexicans had their own school. And my father was very wise, and he saw the writing on the wall, and he knew that the only way we would ever get out of that predicament was through education. Not by blaming anybody, but by doing well in school. And my mother was our catechism teacher, basically, who taught us a religion. But so when and I also know that prejudice starts at an early child by being taught by parents. And an example, again, I went to a college in Kingsville, Texas A&I, and part of my childhood development class, I had to observe in a nursery school with little children. And you know how little children come up in a show and tell, stories that they have to tell in front of everybody else. And we, the students, the college students, stood around in a circle observing what the little children were saying. And one little child, and again, I was in the majority of Hispanic students, college students. And one little child came up and they were talking about their toys. And he said, well, I had a bicycle. He said, but these Mexicans came and stole it. And the teacher, knowing that we were Hispanic, Mexican Americans, kind of like, oh, what do I do now? You know, supposedly, and said, well, you know what? That's why you're supposed to put away your toys when you're done playing with them. You're supposed to put them away. And the little child, oh no, but the Mexicans come in the house and they steal from you. Again, you know, how did the child know what even a Mexican American was? We were all standing there, but it's something that was taught in the home, and so it occurs. I happen to be of Mexican American descent, but it occurs in every ethnic group, you know, in every ethnic. The teaching starts in the home about the ethnic groups, and again, and when you're in school, you're faced with that same prejudice. Um, when when we were first enrolled in school, we had been speaking Spanish at home and not really that much English. Um, so when we came into school, we were considered dumb because we didn't know how to speak English. And so, but you see, my father and my mother were very wise. They taught us not to try to get even with anyone, but on the other hand, to try to surpass that, to try to improve yourself so that this wouldn't happen in the future, to you. So uh, I was very conscientious in school as far as my grades were concerned. I kept up with my classes. The other white students that were competing with me wanted to see how badly I would do, but I worked so hard that I excelled, and it was that discipline that you give yourself, that you bring yourself up. It applies to education, it applies to faith, it applies to religion, it applies to life, and then how you treat people and how you act with people. As far as helping others, I'm not at the point where I can help any because I don't drive, you know. But I have a lot of people helping me. So when I see that they're in need, I help them financially because they're good people.
And God has given you the resources.
Yeah. So anyway, I cry a lot. But that's how I see this parable. I see it as you can't, I don't know, I doubt that the Samaritan, I doubt that the Levites and the priests and the others that were passing by knew what kind of person this was. Like it was a Mexican or a black or whatever. I doubt that they wouldn't have known who he was. They just didn't want to get involved. They didn't have that compassion that you need to try to help someone is one point, But another point is, had they known who that person was and if they had felt some compassion for them if they known, then they might have helped. So again, and the last point I want to make is, you can overcome prejudice by the way you treat others. In other words, if somebody prejudges you that you're this or you're that, or you're not, whatever they might think of you, might approve, false notion of you. If you show them by your example, by the way you behave, by the way you act, they will get to learn. And that another example, when my husband and I bought our first home in Michigan, the salesperson, the realtor that sold it to us, said, "You're the first Mexicans I've sold a house to." And she sold it to us. The house that she sold us happened to be right next to hers. Again, she had a notion, didn't know what Mexicans were like, had never worked with any or known any, and after knowing each other and getting to know each other, we became best friends, helpful friends, that kind of thing. So again, it's how you get to know other people, how you react to them, how you interact with them, how you treat them, will erase prejudices, in my opinion.
The human being is not born with prejudices. It is taught.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing about this parable. What makes the Samaritan so unique, he hasn't developed prejudices against the Israelites. And that's why he's able to reach down into the ditch and do what he did. So this is where the problem comes from. We're taught prejudices, as like you said, from in our homes, from our friends, from others. There's a story that I read many years ago about a family that had moved into a new neighborhood, same town, but a new neighborhood. And they had a young 6-year-old boy, and this boy made friends with everybody, and he had made friends with this young boy, and they became very, very close friends after school. They played together in the local park and so on and so on. And this went on for months. And finally, one day, his father comes looking for him, and he finds him in the park with his best friend playing, and he calls his son over to him. He said, "Come on, we got to go home." And on their way, he says to him, "I forbid you to play with that young boy." And he said, "Why, Daddy?" "Because he's black."
Mhm.
And the little boy stopped. It caught him by surprise. He looked back at the playground, and he realized for the first time in all these months he's been playing with his friend that he had black skin. He'd never noticed it before. From that moment forward, he became prejudiced. Though that's how you learn it. You learn it.
That's what's in the news right now. The thing they're trying to teach or to stress is that the mentality of prejudice in today's society has to change from the childhood up. That white children shouldn't be taught that black people are bad or something like that. That it has to change, and it has to start now. And that because if they're brought up in that mentality, they grow up to not liking them, not wanting to interact with them because they were taught from little children. And they're saying white parents need to teach their children now, starting now with all of what's going on, that black people are good people, that they has to start that way. It has to start now. And,
I remember when I was growing up in Germany, I was in an orphanage for about 6 years. And somewhere along that time period, there was an American boy that came into the orphanage, and he was black. And I thought to myself, I'm a young kid. I'm 6, 7 years old at this time. And I said, an American, wow, how neat! Because everybody liked the Americans. They were the tough guys. They won the war. They beat everybody. Sort of a thing. So I got very close to him, and for many months we were friends. And then he was taken. I guess his family came and picked him up or whatever, and we played together every day. And before he left, I walked up to him and I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Does that rub off?" And I went like that. There was no prejudice. I had not developed, nobody ever taught me that black was bad or black was different or orange was different. I didn't learn any of that. I just asked him, "Does that wash off?" That was it. He laughed and gave me a hug and left. But I hadn't learned any prejudices at that time. So, but anyways, let's take a look. What time is it?
20 after.
Okay, we got about 10 minutes then before we have to finish up. Um,
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when I was a little kid and I used to watch TV, I used to think white people didn't have to go to the bathroom. Because you never saw, white people were the only people you mostly saw, and you never saw them go to the bathroom. So first white person's house I went into, I was ashamed to ask to use the bathroom because I didn't think they had to go.
Good to be a kid, isn't it? It's good to be a kid. But anyways, the road that the Samaritan was traveling on, they say it's believed to have been about 18 Roman miles, about a 6 hours walk journey from Jerusalem towards Samaria. On the way, the unfortunate man fell into the hands of thieves who plundered him, stripped him of his clothes, and left him lying half dead on the road. Now, the idea here also is that oftentimes our neighbor or people we know in our lives will strip us of our dignity. They will strip our good from us, or we can do it to others by talking bad about them, by talking down to them, by degrading them in some way or another. We can strip away their goodness and just kind of leave them laying there in their pain. A lot of times we don't realize it. You get up one morning, it's a good day, everything is nice, you've got a good spirit in your heart, and all of a sudden, half the day is come and gone. Let's say you're driving down the road and you get into an argument with somebody because you're stuck in traffic and you're cursing at each other and yelling and screaming and so on. And you're very fortunate neither one of you gets shot in the process, but you go back home and you've stripped away the goodness, not only of yourself, of what you are as a human being, but the goodness of another human being as well, by the way you treated them. So the road goes both ways. But that's also part of the story as well, not to take the goodness of another human being and just leave them laying there. It is well known that even these days, as a rule, no one goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho without an armed escort. That it is seldom anyone escapes with impunity or attempts to do without the guard of bed when soldiers are approved by the government. So in other words, it's still a problem even today. St. Jerome also talks about it as well. The highway robbers treated the poor man in the unusual manner of their kind. They're robbers. This is a human being who has life but no divine life. In other words, they live. They're kind of like I like to call them, they're among the walking dead. They have no grace. They have no experience of God. They live their lives from moment to the moment, whatever they can steal, whatever they can get, whatever they can lie and obtain in any way that they can, that's what they do. And there's many of them in the world today, that's for sure, as much as there was back then in the time of Christ. This saying itself does not mean plundering, but the taking of the clothes and taking all of their possessions. In addition, they beat the traveler of this parable until he was half dead and left him lying helpless in that miserable state. Why they did that, what they have to do that for? You take the man was by himself. He had no assistance. He had no help. He could have stole all of his booty, whatever, and left him sitting there. You didn't have to beat him half to death, but that's just the way it was. In the second scene of the parable, Christ brings before us a new image, a priest and a Levite. One after the other passed by the same road. Perhaps the time of their service in the temple having expired, they were returning home. It was by chance, as it is usually expressed in the ordinary language, a coincidence. Christ depicts the behavior of the priest as well as the Levite almost in the same brief but significant words. One after the other, they passed close by, saw the poor unfortunate man lying in his blood, and went on their way. Not unintentionally does our Lord refrain from adding one word of blame or condemnation to the simple statement of the facts. And the reason he doesn't put any blame on anybody is because the facts speak for themselves. They're guilty. End of story. You don't have to say anything else. You don't need to point the finger at them. The lesson is already present. So there's a double sort of preposition here, pass by, and then the other side. We talked about that already. In the most striking contrast to the darkness of this second picture, now follows a third scene. A Good Samaritan who's on his journey came by. The great dislike of the Jews of the Samaritans, officially well known from scriptures all throughout history. But the man saw the unfortunate traveler and was moved with compassion, contrasted with the description of the behavior of the priest and the Levite. Seeing him, he was moved with compassion. What's interesting about all of that is the Samaritan didn't make a judgment on the priest or Levite, whether he even knew they came by. The story doesn't tell us, but he makes no judgment in any way, shape, or form. There's no prejudice here. He knows that he's got to stop and help this man. Doesn't matter where he comes from. It doesn't matter what his skin color is. This man is dying. And he's not going to leave him dying in his own blood. He was moved to compassion. Then we are told how he manifests his compassion in a practical manner. And then we see 7 proofs of this quoted in succession. First, most naturally, the stranger went up to the wounded man. Even though this would be presumed necessarily from what follows, still the special mention of this has its justification and significance in contradiction to the twice mentioned aspect of them moving away from the man. The Levite and the priest moved away from him while the Samaritan moved towards him. He then bound up the injured man's wounds. Not content with merely doing this, he poured into them oil and wine. And as I'm reading this story, they got to talking a little bit about the oil and wine. What was interesting here, a traveler always carried oil and wine with them because oil and wine mixed together. Now something I don't know. I don't know if it's a special kind of wine, whatever. But oil and wine was used for wounds. And it was known to kill infections and to heal wounds. I said, boy, that's pretty interesting. But, obviously there's a reason why he had it. It was part of his own provisions, but he used it to give it to the man. But even modern Orientals know right well that oil and wine are particularly beneficial in the treatment of wounds, like I said. After rendering first aid to the wounded man, which included clothing the poor fellow as well, the worthy man set the unhappy traveler on his own horse and led him to the inn where he bestowed further care upon him. These are all different sort of sequences and things that out of necessity, did he have to do it? Nobody required of him, but he did it. He could have helped the man, bound up his wounds, left him sitting there at least hopefully to live for another day. But no, he took the man, put him on his horse, and took him to an inn and made sure he was taken care of. Took the time out of his own life to help by bringing him to an inn. Whether he was going to that inn doesn't say. It may have been out of his way. But he took him anyway. So that evening in the inn, the Samaritan carefully looked to the wants of his patient, readjusted the bandages on his wounds, procured a bed for him, and brought him food and drink. But the next morning he was obliged to continue his journey, and now he consummated his work of charity in the most perfect manner by providing a convalescent with lodging and attendance for the following days. As he took 2 denarii and gave them to the landlord with the charge, take care of him and whatsoever you shall spend over and above. When I return, I will repay you. And a denarius was usually a day's labor, a day's work. So the generous, unselfish stranger would pay for everything. And the funny thing, the interesting thing about all of that is never asking a single thing in return. He asked for nothing be given back to him. He just simply did it out of the goodness of his heart and his compassion. Which of these three, in thy opinion, as Jesus asked the lawyer, proved himself a neighbor to him that fell among the robbers? As a man had come to him first, who is my neighbor, after an example so vividly and touchingly illustrated, there could not be a moment's hesitation to the answer of our Lord's final question. However disagreeable the Jewish doctor of the law might find it to praise the Samaritan or learn anything from, he had to be a witness to the truth, to acknowledge that not the priest, not the Levite, but this stranger of Samaria had proved himself the neighbor of the poor, unfortunate man. Remember, in a Jewish time period of Christ, your neighbor was somebody that was of your language, of your culture, somebody within your tribe, within your bearing, within your surroundings. That was your neighbor. Everyone else was off distance. Basically, you had no obligation whatsoever to help them in any way, shape, or form. And that's the way they lived their lives. It's a very sort of strange way to live it, but that's the way they lived it. So, and Christ confirmed his answer by the exhortation to a practical imitation of Samaritan's splendid example in the fulfillment of the law of charity. Go out and do likewise. In other words, open your heart wide. Never judge. Christ had to crack open their understanding like a nut. There was a hard shell around this lawyer's head, which there is for a lot of people as well. We have a hard shell over our head. According to their teachings, none but Jews had any claim to be regarded as a neighbor. Just like I said, these views we have to consider as prevailing amongst the Jews in the time of our Lord. And basically, like you said earlier, the basic idea here is also not just the Samaritan helping the poor man out of the ditch, but Christ comes into the world to help the human being out of his misery and out of his sins. That's what this whole parable in reality in the end is all about, but it's a reminder to us as well that we have to be like Christ and to help others out of their misery in whatever way we can. It doesn't mean I'm going to go down to the local bar where everybody's drinking and take their liquor from. That's not it. But if somebody comes to me and asks for help, to make myself available to help them. That's the important thing, And if people, come and they ask, that by that time, people nowadays don't like to ask for anything, hardly, But if somebody's coming to ask for something, they're in dire need. Don't embarrass them. Be kind to them.
Question, when we can get some time, I see this, maybe like Jesus is giving this prelude to what was coming in his life also. I wonder if the lawyer was there when Jesus was on his road to Calvary, carrying his cross, because I almost see this as our Lord was that beggar, carrying his cross. Look how people ignored him and they joined in with the rioting. They spit on him and insulted him and everything, And very few people came to him to help him as much as he did. But even up until the end, when
Pick a parable and write it down for me.
When Joseph volunteered to help take down his body and
Showed mercy.
yes, I kind of see this like maybe Jesus was setting that up because later on he was going to be that beggar that had been beat. And so maybe he touched some lives there that had some compassion for him while he was carrying his cross. Any correlation to that? You see what I'm saying?
Probably, at least in some way. At the same time, not complete, because Christ, of course, he died,
Right.
and he had no one to help him, except for carrying a cross, and that was about it.
Gee, that's the next one.
Right.
Okay, the next parable we're going to look at is the friend at midnight, which is in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, 5 through 13. Any other questions on this?
Can I say one last story?
Can we do it quickly, because I got to go.
Real quick. When Father Jay was here, we went with him to Guadalajara, Mexico.
I've been there.
It's customary to go down to the plaza where everybody sits, and children come with their shoe shine equipment to shine their shoes, And a little boy came and was crying. And we were sitting with Father Jay, Cliff and I, and so we asked the little, Father Jay couldn't speak Spanish, we asked the little boy why he was crying, and he said because some older kids had stolen his money that he had gotten from the shoe shines that he had had, and I wanted to know then if Cliff and Father Jay wanted the shoe shine, and Father Jay had tennis shoes on. And Father Jay said, yeah, but I had tennis shoes. And the little boy said, oh, he could clean those too without any problem. And he took out his soap and brush and whatever, and he cleaned his tennis shoes. And when it was all done, Father Jay reached into his pocket and handed him money. And when the little boy saw, when he opened his hand, he went like, oh my God, all this money there, whatever, we don't know, I don't know how much money he gave him, but the little boy obviously was. And so the next day, of course, we're back at the plaza, and of course the little boy comes back with a little friends. And Father Jay said to tell him, I want to help you, he said, but you need to come by yourself. In other words, I can't, whatever. But anyway, I started asking him, well, do you go to church? Do you go to catechism? And you know your prayers? Sister Rosa was wanting to do her thing. And I said, do you remember who this man is? And the little boy said, yes. And I said, who do you, after Father Jay gave him money, he went around him to the back and gave him a big, big hug, the little boy. So I said, do you remember who this man was? And the little boy said, yes. And I said, who is he? He said, Jesus.
Oh.
And it just was so touching, to see that.
Okay, parable for next week, the friend coming at midnight, Luke 11, 5-13. Okay, got that? Okay, all right, let us close because